Greetings, all. We are here back for the second week in a row on LinkedIn Live with our weekly webinar series, which we do to support all of the stakeholders in the Common Time community, called Wisdom Wednesdays. Let me check my microphone here. And we're good to go. Wisdom Wednesdays is an effort from Common Time to better support our stakeholders, like we said. But for all of you newbies, this is what Common Time is. Common Time is your home for increased access to the arts and arts education. We have built this amazing, inclusive, and global platform that connects artists, educators, individual learners, and arts organizations in a seamless virtual experience to increase access for the arts and make it easier for people to have these cross-cultural, global, educational arts experiences, whether they're in music, drama, dance, or the visual arts. Please head over to our LinkedIn profile or commontime.online to get more information. So, what we're going to be talking about today is something that's very important to our mission here at Common Time. One of our missions is to enrich learner experience and support educators by giving a global Common Time guest artist in every classroom. I feel like I'm running for president and I'm standing up there saying, by 2024, I will put a guest artist in every classroom in this land. And we've talked a lot about the importance and the benefits and what you can do with a guest artist in your classroom. But today we're going to put a little bit of a different spin on it and give you something really actionable. We're going to talk about how to use a Common Time guest artist for your assessments. How to use a Common Time guest artist for your assessments. So the first thing we'll tackle here is what is a Common Time guest artist? Well, I'll tell you just that. A Common Time guest artist is one of the many multilingual, multicultural, multinational professional teaching artists that we have on Common Time. We have musicians, actors, visual artists, and dancers from 20, 30 countries speaking languages representative of all those locations that are ready now to come into your classroom with professionalism, expertise, and a fun and engaging attitude, just like the one that you're seeing here today. When you head over to commontime.online, there is an artist tab at the top left-hand corner. If you click on that tab, you can browse through and look at all of these different artists that are able to come into your classrooms on demand today. So now that you see what's possible, you see all of the artists that can come into your classrooms and deliver sessions on painting, on singing, on playing the piano, on theater, on music appreciation, on electronic music and DJing, on opera singing. When we move forward and we look in some of the other fields like drama and theater, we have artists that can come in and talk about guitar or music composition or even improv theater or even reading lines for an audition. We have television producers on here. We have people that are choreographers that are ready to come into your arts classes. So, if you need some more information on how to use a Common Time guest artist in your classroom, you can check back on the blog at commontime.online. But if you're looking for how to use a guest artist in your assessments, then you need go nowhere else but where you are now. Let's get into it. Here's how you can use a Common Time guest artist to enrich the assessment experience for your students. And one thing we're going to go back to is here. We, especially in the arts, have to start using assessments as a tool to allow our students to make real world connections. That's why 2 weeks ago I talked about something called the GRASP task in assessment, which stands for Goal, Role, Audience, Scenario, Product. That's so important because that role part is the most important part to me. you're not dealing with sixth grade painters. You're dealing with little bitty Picassos. And when you start to approach your assessments like that, it changes the way your students think, because the arts can move from something that is not important to something that is important. It's almost the same concept as in the kindergarten classroom, how they have to give the kids jobs, like, oh, you're the line leader, you're the pencil monitor, etc., etc. So how I'm going to break down assessments for you today and connect them to how you can use a guest artist to enrich them, I'm going to use the IB MYP objectives. So I use these vocabulary words because they are what's familiar to me. I'm an IB teacher. But if you break down what I'm saying and if you listen to what I'm saying, you will see that what I'm telling to you about my views on the assessment via the IB jargon is pretty global as far as what I've seen in terms of arts teaching across maybe the UK curriculum, the Ontario Canadian curriculum, the different US curriculum. They're pretty standard. So don't get caught up in the IB terminology. You can use what I'm going to tell you, I think, pretty much in any setting for assessments. So the IB breaks down assessment into 4 categories that we're going to highlight today. It's knowledge and understanding, and within that there are 3 strands. Demonstrate awareness of the art form studied, including vocab. Demonstrate awareness of the relationship between the art form and its context. Demonstrate awareness of the links between the knowledge acquired and the artwork created. They talk about the second assessment criteria is skill. You can demonstrate the acquisition and development of the skills and techniques of the art form studied, and you can demonstrate the application of skill to create, present, or perform art. The third assessment criteria is creative thinking. There are 3 strands under that. Developing a feasible, clear, coherent, and imaginative artistic intention. Demonstrate a range and depth of creative thinking behaviors, and demonstrate the exploration of ideas to share artistic intention to a point of realization. Number 4, assessment criteria 4 is called responding, and there are 3 strands under that. Those 3 strands are construct meaning and transfer learning to a new setting, create an artistic response that intends to reflect or impact the world around you, and critique the artwork of self and others. Then, one more thing we'll speak about after all that are the importance of grasp tasks, which I cannot say enough. So let's start with criteria A. The first strand, demonstrate awareness of the art form studied. So let's turn our pretender hats on. Let's pretend that we're teaching a music unit on rhythm and Indian music. Okay, that's our unit. We're learning all about rhythm, Western rhythm. We're learning about rhythm notation. And then we're also going to put those skills and playing rhythms in the context of learning Indian music and some Indian rhythms. Maybe we sing a song in Hindi, etc., etc. So while you're learning Indian music, you can have common time artists like Prannoy Chatterjee, who is a master tabla player. He could come into your class and give a performance. And then maybe students are using their ears to orally identify quarter notes, eighth notes, and 16th notes in the performance they're hearing. Maybe you have some type of sticker system where they put a sticker up on a board every time they hear a quarter note. They put a green sticker every time they hear an eighth note. And let's say you know, because you spoke to Prannoy in our in-platform chat feature, that he's going to use eighth notes 10 times, so 100% correct on the knowledge of these is 10 green things. Or maybe you're asking your students to draw quarter notes when they hear them or eighth notes when they hear them. However you're doing it, tomato, tomato, you're asking your student to respond to this performance from a traditional Indian musician by identifying these different types of rhythms. Okay. Another thing you can do, maybe students use these basic rhythms to write a short pattern for Prannoy to perform on his tabla. And then he could go through and perform the little patterns. Once again, your students are using this guest artist to show you knowledge of the art form. And maybe the knowledge you're trying to highlight is that they can write rhythms. Okay? Strand number 2 is demonstrate awareness of the relationship between the art form and its context. So we know that rhythm exists. Now let's put it in context, and let's use this professional musician to help us do that while also providing a real-world connection for your students. So while learning about Indian music, maybe the students can listen to Prannoy perform certain rhythmic patterns, and the students can identify if he's using rhythmic patterns in 3, 4, or 5, using some Indian rhythmic vocabulary like Chacharastra, Khanda, or the Tisra. These are some vocab words that have to do with Indian rhythmic structures. I'm assuming you're teaching that in your unit. Okay, now your students are using vocabulary to identify rhythms in the context of Indian music performance, and they're doing this with the help of a real live professional musician right there in front of them. And here's the third strand under that first criteria, knowledge and understanding. Demonstrate an awareness of the links between the knowledge you acquired and the artwork that's created. Maybe students can perform a song, a set of rhythms, and be graded by Prannoy given his perspective on traditional Indian music. That way the students are receiving feedback, they're receiving a cross-cultural connection, they're getting assessed by an outside source, which the IB wants, especially even any non-IB people. You want outside sources to assess your students from time to time. They call that standardization and moderation. And it allows students to see the direct link between the knowledge they've learned and the artwork that they're creating while receiving direct feedback from someone who's a part of that culture. I think that at the end of a unit on Indian music, bringing in an artist like Prannoy would almost be like a treat. It's like when I was in high school, we spent a whole unit learning about water treatment centers, and then we took a field trip to our town's water treatment center, and we learned and saw how they took that water from Atlanta in the river and they turned it all around and then pushed it back out into our drinking faucets. Criteria A, from a teaching standpoint, criteria A is a perfect area in which to invite your guest artists in during the teaching phase of the unit, because they can impart a lot of knowledge to your students, especially vocabulary when you're dealing with other languages, if you're doing like an international or global-minded type of unit. And they can also easily add the context as well. Me teaching Indian music in context would take a lot of thought. Prannoy Chatterjee teaching Indian music in context is called waking up that day. Any assessments you give after that provocation could be based on the knowledge that the students are getting from Prannoy. And if you start the unit this way, you're immediately adding the context and you're getting all of your content, and the links between the two are clear as crystal. Next, let's talk about the second assessment criteria. Once again, these are easily transferable to whatever curriculum you're using, so don't get caught up in my jargon. I'm just speaking from my own experience here. Criteria B, skill, and we're going to pretend that we are teaching a unit on ballet, and we are using Common Time artist Menon from New York City, who's a professional ballerina. Strand number 1 is your students need to be able to demonstrate the acquisition and development of the skills and techniques of the art form studied. So you could have Menon, our professional ballerina, come into your class twice. Okay? And all of the booking, all of the scheduling is all in one place. All of the video conferencing is right in one place at commontime.online. I'll type that into the chat here. We've got a couple viewers. Yeah, I've got that in the chat there. So Menon could come into your class twice. The first time, she's going to deliver a master class where she demonstrates certain moves or positions to your students. This is purely teaching. She's teaching vocabulary. She's laying it down from her perspective as a professional. She's giving her context. The second time she comes in, she could conduct a traditional dance class where they will go through some type of choreography. She will be using the vocabulary she taught in the previous class, and they'll move seamlessly through the choreography. It's kind of like if you've ever seen a movie about dancing, you know, they go through the dance class and there are students that can't keep up because they don't know the moves, they don't know the vocabulary. If your students are keeping up, they're showing that they've acquired and developed a skill and a technique in the art form of being in ballet. So your students get experience to a ballerina twice, and both of the experiences are growth opportunities. The first one is their initial introduction to some of these things, and the second one is them getting better at it. But through them getting better, let's say they're in a more intermediate setting here, you're able to see the acquisition and development. And that's one thing I love about some of the vocabulary here is we're not asking you, are your students good at dancing? We're asking you, did they acquire and develop a skill? That could mean Monday, you could not put your shoes on. Tuesday, you put your shoes on. That's acquisition and development. Someone that does that could get an A+ in this category. IB doesn't use A+, but it's the first thing that came to my mind. The second strand under skill, criteria B, is demonstrate the application of the skill to create, present, or perform art. So this is your performance, your presentation, your final product. And you could have students use the positions, moves, techniques learned during their unit of study to create some short routines. You could do this in small groups. You could do this individually. The class could work together to create a group routine. Then you could bring Menon in, our professional ballet dancer who's available now on commentime.online, and you could have them teach their routines to her. And they've got to use the correct vocabulary. They've got to communicate correctly. And of course, they have to perform the things that they are trying to get Menon to do. I really like this idea because you're giving your students a performance opportunity. You're giving them arguably one of the most important types of audiences that we could give them as educators, in that people that know their craft. I ask this question often in these webinars. If you're a dance teacher, are you the only professional dancer your students know? If so, I don't think that's okay. The same thing is we don't allow students to just read one type of book their whole life. They don't just watch one type of television. They shouldn't just know one dancer or one musician, for example. Menon in this setting can give your students feedback on their learning, their dance moves, and the way that they teach because ding, 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 she's a teacher. When you look at your grasp task for teaching a dance lesson, your goal is to teach a lesson. Your role is you're a dance teacher. Why not have them participate in that with a real dance teacher? We're making real world connections. I just looked up, in 2018, there were 54,000 plus dance studios that are registered and pay taxes with a business license in the US, just by itself. How many dance studios are there in the world? Of those 100, 200, 300,000 dance studios in the world, how many teachers are employed? Millions. Having your students teach a dance lesson isn't some funny, ha-ha game. That's a career. And our students hear enough about all the careers that they can get from doing well in chemistry. We know it. We get it. Let's talk about what we can gain from being in this class. I like doing that because it puts the arts benefits in concrete terms. And that's what we got to do to stay alive. Next, criteria C, assessment group C, creative thinking. There are 3 strands to this, and for our pretending, we are going to pretend that We are doing a unit on visual arts with Malathi, who is one of our Common Time artists. She's done a lot of work with us more recently. She's fantastic and a great painter. She is currently based in Germany, and she is available now on commontime.online. So, strand number one is we want the students to be able to develop a feasible, clear, coherent, and imaginative artistic intention. This is your plan. What are you going to create? We're going to create a self-portrait. What are we going to do before creation? I want my self-portrait to look like this. Here's 10 self-portraits that I've looked at, and here's who painted them, and here's what I liked or disliked about all of them. Here are the feelings that I want to portray in my self-portrait, etc., etc., etc. That's what that strand is referring to. Everything that happens before creation. Malathi could come into your arts class and help students create a piece of art by showing one of her own pieces of art and going through her entire creative process. How did she conceive this idea? How did she execute it? This is great because it introduces the students to what a creative process looks like. The process of planning, execution, and reflection is lifelong. Everything you'll ever do is planning, execution, and reflection. So she's showing them how I plan, execute, and reflect as a professional artist. Then, with Malathi's help and the teacher's help, the teacher could come in and help the students take what they've learned from Malathi, okay, and then edit her process and basically put it in their own words to create their own process. Maybe I'm going to scroll TikTok under hashtag portrait. Maybe I'm going to look on YouTube under portraits. You know, they're going to create their own processes and their own intentions with help from a professional artist who makes intentions for a living. Okay? The second strand is you need the students to be able to demonstrate a range and depth of creative thinking behaviors. And the reason I'm breaking these down is because I think these are some of the more abstracted the descriptions. To me, demonstrating creative thinking behavior is the scientific method. We want to see your students create an intention and a plan, start to execute that plan, have to go back and make changes to that plan, and before they come to the final product. And myself as a musician, you don't play a piece one time and that's it. You play it like this, then you feel different. And you say, well, maybe I should play do-do-doo, do-do-do-do-do. Then maybe you say, no, maybe I should play do-do-dum, do-do-dum, be, and you go back. So it's the scientific method. You have a hypothesis, you test it, it didn't work. In the arts, that's AKA you didn't like it, AKA it doesn't fit with the time constraint, AKA it's not possible with the materials you have. And then you go back, you reassess your intention, then you do it again. So the IB wants to see, you know, the work you're doing in the process. The way that Malathi can help with this is that during the art creation process, have Malathi come back and offer feedback to your students, critical feedback, and then incentivize your students to apply her feedback. I don't want to say force them, but essentially you're throwing a curveball to your students to trigger them to go into creative behavior. You're having them start making their art, then have Malathi come in, give them a critique, and then incentivize them to apply her critique, thereby triggering them into a creative behavior. And then, of course, all of this, if you're in teaching middle year students in the IB, would be documented in their process journal so we can see how they had an intention. They got some feedback, so they went back and then kept moving forward. The third strand under the creative thinking assessment criteria is demonstrate the exploration of ideas to share artistic intention to a point of realization. The cliff notes of that is we need a final product. So criteria C, creative thinking, needs planning, execution with thought, and then we need a final product. After all of your planning, your intentions, and your changes, and your work are finished, there should be some type of final product. And maybe you could consider hosting an art showcase and invite your school's community. And you can also invite Malathi to come in and beam in from Germany on commentime.online. And have her be a part of this so that you're once again allowing your students to get critical feedback from someone real. And if you're looking at the grasp task, your students are taking the role of an artist. Get real artists in front of them. Allow them to showcase their work, showcase that final product to that artist. And if you've done everything that I've suggested here, then that guest artist has now become a part of the student's learning process. It will be disadvantageous for you to not have her there when the students are presenting their final work, since hopefully, her feedback would have been enriching for the students. Another idea that I thought of was called Back to the Blank, which is where your students can present their artwork to our guest artists and to their peers, and they walk the audience back to when the canvas was blank. So they showcase the art, and then they take us backwards through their process, all the way back to when the canvas was blank. And then afterwards, Malathi could take one of her pieces of artwork and do the same. And then when your students are reflecting, when they're doing their reflection, they can reflect on what their process looked like versus what a professional's process looked like. And if we're lucky, one of your students is going to say, man, I kind of paint like that artist. I might be an artist, and that's the dream for an arts teacher. I know all of my buddies in the States, anytime one of their students becomes a music major, it's like they won the lottery. They're skipping down the street. And I get it. You should feel like that. Here's the fourth and final assessment criteria, as once again I'm using International Baccalaureate MYP vocabulary, but the concepts that we're discussing here I think can be generalized to almost any of the arts curricula. Don't get caught up in my vocab. The IB calls it skill, the Colorado standards call it expression, which they really mean playing. The IB calls it creative thinking, the UK curriculum calls it create. The IB calls it knowledge and understanding. The Ontario curriculum calls it I forget, but the Colorado standards call it theory. That's what they mean by knowledge and understanding of music. They call it theory. So don't get caught up in my vocab. This can work for anyone. The fourth and final assessment criteria group is criteria D, responding. And we're going to pretend now that we're teaching a drama class, and we're going to invite Jasmine Akakpo, who lives out in Hollywood now, and she is a screen actress and a writer and a director out in Hollywood. And you're going to bring her out on Common Time to beam into your classroom. So the scenario is that your students are in groups, or maybe they're in one large group, and they are learning a short scene from a play, okay, where they have characters and they're learning their lines. So the first strand is construct meaning and transfer the learning to a new setting. The original scenario for learning, you're learning a scene from a play, is assuming that this is going to be for a performance, and maybe you will perform this or record it or present it in some way. But one small way that you could have the students transfer their learning to a new setting and also add some real-world context would be to have them prepare their scene not for a live performance but for an audition. Meaning they may have to act their part out with just someone reading the lines, not another actor. So there's no physical connection, there's no playing off of each other, there's no back and forth, it's just you. And as far as different subjects that you could transfer the learning to are concerned, to me, this reminds me of English class or any writing type class, when you're submitting a paper, there's no feedback. It's just you and your writing implement or your computer. That's all it is. It's just you showing what you have. There's no ensemble element. There's no group element. And that is a way that your students could transfer their learning to something else. How to operate when you're in an individual setting. And they could do this by turning their scene and turning their lines into audition material. So using Jasmine's expertise as an actor and a director, students could audition for her. Instead of performing, they could actually audition for her as a means of assessment instead of doing a performance, and then she would offer them critical feedback from a director in Hollywood's point of view, which is great because we're ding 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 connecting the role in their grasp task to their actual assessment. Ding ding ding, creating a real world connection to their learning, because everyone in the world knows what happens if you get good at auditioning for theater roles in movies and TV. We all know what happens then. Okay. The second strand is create an artistic response that intends to reflect on or impact the world around them. One way we could exercise this assessment strand with our guest artist, Jasmine, is that we could have Jasmine come in to add some curveballs to their audition process. And another real world connection, oftentimes when you're auditioning for a role, casting directors will say, okay, could you try it with a little more energy? Could you try it with a different accent? Could you try it, but this time I want you to pretend that you're talking to a ghost instead of a real person. Try it again, but this time I want you to X, Y, Z. Okay? This is giving your students the opportunity to respond artistically to a stimulus that they're getting in real time. They're able to reflect on the instruction they're giving. They're able to reflect on their world around them and impact the world around them by taking those curveballs. And once again, you're having Jasmine fill the role of a director, which she's done in real life. This could become a key part of the assessment and give students the opportunity to directly respond in real time to the, quote, world around them, which is something that's so important in theater, especially when you're performing live. You're constantly responding to the world around you and the people around you and the audience, etc. Excuse me. The third and final strand in this criteria D, is critique the artwork of yourself and others. So what you could do is you could actually have Jasmine, our professional actress, to use her insight into acting and directing out in Hollywood, and she could actually help students create their own rubric by which to assess acting performances. She could teach them what do we look for when we're casting someone for a role. What are we looking at? What are we listening for? What are we thinking? What are we feeling? And through working with Jasmine, they could actually create a rubric for how they would like to assess acting performances. Once again, real world connections. Creating a rubric by which to assess an acting performance, that's a real job. And we're exposing our students to this. Like I always said, they already know they can be doctors, lawyers, engineers. They already know. Let's teach them what they can do with our classes too. Yeah, because we're not extra. We're required for that holistic education. And we're not holistic just for the sake of SEL or just for the sake of expression. Music and the arts have to be part of your school's curriculum, because if you don't, you're losing the opportunity to introduce your students to an entire sector of the economy of the world worth of job opportunities, right? I hope you're all nodding your head going, yeah, right now. Somebody's with me, I know it. And then using a professional actress like Jasmine, who you can bring in on demand only on CommonTime.online, will give you the opportunity to help your students now become casting directors. Maybe for your Criteria D assessment, your students aren't actors anymore, they're casting directors. And then, of course, they could take the videotapes that you have recorded of the other students performing and then assess them and assess themselves using the criteria that they recreated. Okay? Lastly, I want to remind you what GRASP tasks are. Using GRASP tasks has changed my teaching. And one thing that in my personal life that I've been interested in is visualization. And as a percussionist, we're all hand-eye coordinator, and being able to visualize the type of stroke you're going to use, where you're going to strike your instrument is super important. And I've been having my students do this as well. Visualize. You're a sound engineer working for Disney, and we're adding sound effects to a silent cartoon. If you were with me last week, you know exactly what I'm talking about. Okay? Visualize that you are a casting director. You know, and the GRASP task helps the students visualize because you get a concrete role and you also have a concrete goal for what you are going to do. Thank you all for joining with me on this installment of our Wisdom Wednesday webinar. As always, the video of this, along with the blog post, will be available in full at commontime.online/blog. And get in touch with us today on Facebook, Instagram, LinkedIn, all at Common Time, or info@commontime.online, our email address, so that we can help you bring in some international teaching artists to beef up and enrich your students' assessment experience. Thank you.